Well, thank you for joining us, Mayor Peduto. City Channel's happy to have you back again for the third year to sit down for an interview. So 2016 was the Pittsburgh's bicentennial. We had a lot of events happening throughout the city. Do you think that we adequately celebrated the history of the city, and what were your favorite events?
Well, I think part of the challenge was how do we have a year-long celebration without spending much money. You know, we're still under Act 47, budget's still tight, but what we were able to do is leverage a little bit of city money with state funds, with funds from our foundations, our corporations, and provide a full year's worth of ways to celebrate who we are. Of course, we had the big events like the parade and the concert and the celebration in November and the celebration in January. But it was really celebrating all the events that are already occurring and having a passport to all of our neighborhoods, which is probably the best way to have celebrated it.
Another thing that happened this year were that there were a lot of public safety ceremonies. For
a lot.
Yes, and you know, we recorded those, and we get a sense through watching you at the ceremonies that you really enjoy promoting city employees from within.
Yeah, I regret that I've had to miss one event so far, and I hope to not miss any more. But we have now, starting in this year, the highest number of police officers that we've had since 2002. So for the past 15 years, this is the most police officers the city has had. We actually have over 900 when you count our recruits. We have more firefighters than we've had since 2004. We have more medics, and now EMTs, a whole new program to be able to start people into the career of becoming a paramedic by giving them an opportunity right out of high school to become EMTs than we've had since 2002 as well. So we have more public safety officials than we've ever had in the past 15 years. But the interesting thing about it, we still have less total city employees than when we came into office back in 2014. So we've been able to put the priorities on public works and on public safety. We've been able to eliminate a lot of middle management, and we're getting to the point now where soon we'll be able to bring back community-oriented policing, bringing back the officer into the neighborhood who's responsible for that area and who the public gets to know, and they get to know the public.
Well, that's great. I mean, it's wonderful that you're able to increase safety for all the residents.
Yeah, it's trying to be proactive to stop crime instead of on the back end trying to be able to solve it. And it's a partnership between our Bureau of Police and the people of the city.
Well, shifting gears a little bit, last April we held Inclusive Innovation Week, which was a series of events that were hosted throughout the city. Is that something that you're planning to expand and make annual?
More than annual. I mean, it needs to be something that we have every day. We're looking at ways that we can create rec to tech within our rec centers so the kids after school wouldn't only play basketball but would learn coding from local companies and a lot of the best coders in the world. Imagine learning how to play football from Antonio Brown, where you can learn computer sciences from some of the people who are changing this earth. So we want to make inclusive innovation part of our DNA. And why is that important? Well, the world's changing, and we know that. It's now predicted that kids that are in high school will have 7 different jobs before they retire, 5 of which haven't even been created. So as we see this economy shifting, we have to figure out how we're going to make it shift for everyone, not just some and leave others behind. We saw that when the Industrial Revolution happened, and people like my grandfathers who worked in the mills were treated much differently than the folks that owned the mills or managed the mills. But we went about and fixed it. We rolled up our sleeves and we created not only this country and built this country, but we built the middle class. So now with the new economy and the shift that we're seeing and the disruption we're seeing from this new economy, we have to make sure that everything we're doing reaches out and gives everybody what they should have. Opportunity. Can't make decisions for people, but we can certainly give them opportunity. And that's what inclusive innovation is all about. How do we make sure everyone has a chance to succeed with the new economy that's coming?
And that's something that's rare for Pittsburgh, because a lot of other cities have innovation hubs, they have innovation initiatives, but ours is inclusive, which really sets us apart.
I think the difference is that almost every city has an incubator space for startups and for companies that are getting off the ground. Almost all of them have one location where companies will try to expand opportunity for others, but very few of them have it throughout the entire city, where the entire city is a part of becoming, whether it is learning how to do technical work with computers or learning the old-time crafts of being able to do bricklaying, in order to be able to do work with iron, in order to be able to create your own product and open your own store. That is where the economy is shifting in both directions, and we have it happening all over this city.
Let's kind of talk about transparency a little bit. Earlier this year, you asked City Channel Pittsburgh to begin recording ICA meetings. Why is that important?
Well, I think most of the people realized when a lot of the articles started coming out about what was happening with the oversight board, they didn't know who was on the oversight board. They didn't know what was being discussed with the oversight board. They knew that they were holding over $20 million of their dollars, but they really didn't know what was happening. So with the new board alignment and with the new chair, it was recognized that providing that information to people would be worthwhile. What we want to do is expand upon that, though. We want the Planning Commission meetings to be on Channel 13. We want the ability to have, or Channel 44 if you have Verizon. We want to be able to have zoning meetings available to the public and online. We want to be able to have all those different things that your tax dollars pay for available for you to be able to watch and see it without having to come downtown.
Something else that happened in 2016 that's kind of awesome for sports fans in the city was when the Penguins won the Stanley Cup. So just kind of like lightening this conversation, how often were you with Lord Stanley this past year?
Twice. So once when the Stanley Cup made its way down to City Hall, and then one other time at an event where the Stanley Cup was at. And I have to add to the parade, since the Stanley Cup was right there as well with the players. I got to tell you though, this is the truth. I felt more relief winning this cup than I felt any excitement. And when I talked to the president of the Penguins, David Morehouse, he said the same thing. He said that in the third period, he couldn't even watch the game anymore. He'd just walk up and down the hallway. It was sort of like you knew this team had it. You knew this team was much faster than every other team in the NHL. You expected that they were going to win, but those games were so damn nerve-wracking that at the end of it, it was just like, okay, good, that's done. We won it, okay.
And the parade was awesome.
The parade was great, yeah. And I know that the Penguins themselves had a great time. I got the chance to talk to a few of the players and coaches, and they really appreciated the people of Pittsburgh, not just for being there, but for pouring their hearts into it.
Mm-hmm. Back in September, City Channel unveiled its new studio space.
Yeah.
This is our first television upgrade since 1982.
Yeah.
What did you think of it?
So think about that for a second. You would not take your car to a place that hasn't been changed since 1982. You certainly wouldn't go into a hospital if it were still operating off 1982 technology. But this organization and this bureau has been able to cobble together basically equipment that was still around when the 8-track was being used. The studio now is an opportunity to communicate directly with people, to be able to enhance the programming of things that are happening in the city, and to empower people through information. So it's state of the art. I really am looking forward to being able to get some other programs going that would work, like learning about on a weekly basis what's happening with the Bureau of Neighborhood Empowerment. How are we actually helping the lowest income areas of our city to be able to work through their own community organizations for betterment? What's happening on with community affairs? Weekly update as they travel through all these different community meetings throughout the city, letting the people of Pittsburgh know what they're hearing, about each neighborhood. There's really good ways to be able to communicate with people that, because we now have state-of-the-art technology, will allow us to do it.
Well, we're all really excited about that.
Yeah,
So.
it's a great studio.
Yeah. In 2016, the city hosted a number of conferences, including the National League of Cities.
Yeah.
Why is it important to bring leaders of the country into the city?
Because they become the spokespeople, and they do it through a third party that says, actually, you wouldn't believe what's happening in Pittsburgh. 3,500 government leaders, council members, mayors, those that work within cities throughout this country, helped to celebrate our 200th anniversary with us. We all gathered on Light Up Night, and just by chance it was like 60 degrees outside, so downtown was absolutely bumping. But what they took away was all of the different stories of spending 5 days here, of getting to go into the neighborhoods, of getting to see all the different initiatives that are happening around education, sustainability, and all the other programs. And then to see something that we take for granted but other cities don't, which is how we work in partnerships and how we're able to do really big things by finding the different partners to help us to be able to do it. I think that was probably the biggest takeaway, that and how beautiful of a city this is.
Well, it's always wonderful when we can show off this city, because I'm sure everybody watching is super proud. Let's talk about Uber for a minute. Were you scared when you were the first passenger in the Uber self-driving car?
So not at all. I mean, that was an easy thing to do. I had meetings with them for a while on the technology, and Carnegie Mellon had been doing it since 2007, so I knew that it would be safe. But what I wasn't sure of is how the partnership would work with the city and Uber. We certainly did a lot to be able to help them to get off the ground and get their business model moving. But I was disappointed when we were applying for the Smart City Challenge, when we wanted to really showcase that as something we would be able to do in 2016 and get them to commit even a little bit more, that they weren't willing to do that. And there have been a couple of things since that really called into question what the partnership will look like. We go back to what we were talking about before. When the Industrial Revolution happened, it changed the economy, but it also changed society. And in Pittsburgh, we went to work after the fact to fix it, to make sure that people's wages were good, to make sure that the environment was not being destroyed. We can't make that same mistake twice. So if we're going to see the economy change, we have to see society change at the same time, which means Uber has to be a better partner. And they've got to partner with us to make sure that the industry that they're building will enhance society and not make us go backwards to what we already had to fight for once.
And speaking of that industry, though, Pittsburgh is becoming and establishing itself as a leader in robotics. So, I mean, there are a lot of opportunities there.
There's still folks who will argue that within artificial intelligence and robotics, that there are 3 centers, and they are Boston, Pittsburgh, and Silicon Valley. I'd argue that within the software realm, Silicon Valley competes with Pittsburgh. Within the hardware, they're not even on the charts. And the same with Boston. I think that we have, and what you'll see in 2017, is that it will be clear that Pittsburgh is the global leader in artificial intelligence and in robotic science.
Okay, that's pretty cool.
Yeah.
At your annual budget address in November, you said,
No matter what the law in Washington is, you can't outlaw compassion. Well,
could you talk a little bit about Pittsburgh as a welcoming city and why it's important that we're inclusive?
It's who we are. I mean, it's the heritage of those that came throughout the decades, especially those that came at the turn of the last century. People like my grandparents who came from Italy and those that came from Eastern Europe. And the reason that they were able to come in the legal way was because the United States opened the doors and we welcomed everybody in. And what happened was a lot of people didn't like that. They didn't like the Southern Europeans and the Eastern Europeans coming in. So by 1924, they changed the laws and they said, okay, you're only allowed in based upon the percentage of you that were in this country in 1890. So all of a sudden you saw the gates close and then they reopened again when the country opened its heart again, and other people were able to come over legally. What we've done is we've closed our doors, and we've said as a nation, it's going to be very, very difficult for you to come in. And what we're saying is, that's not the Pittsburgh way, that Pittsburgh is a blue-collar town, that it's a tough town, but it's a town with a big heart, and we want to take care of each other. And no matter what happens in Washington, no matter what happens in Harrisburg, we're going to take care of our neighbors. And there's a great Pittsburgher who taught us that and told us about it every day. His name was Mr. Rogers. And we'll call on the spirit of Mr. Rogers to help us through these days.
Also, just recently, we have a new police chief.
Yeah.
Why is Chief Schubert the right person for the job?
Well, a couple things. A little bit of background. I've known Scott for 22 years. We went up the ranks together. I was a staff member to a city councilman. He was the lieutenant at the old Zone 6 in Squirrel Hill under then Commander Dom Costa, who's now state representative Dom Costa. And I watched Scott rise, and I knew that he had leadership, or as they say in hockey, the letter on the sweater ability. He, I think, is able to do two things very well. Number one, he's able to walk amongst the rank and feel that he's an officer's officer, but he's also able to earn the respect of the community. And that's something that we need on both tracks. Now, what you'll also be seeing over the course of the next couple of weeks is a whole new command staff coming in too. And there's a change in leadership between what we've had 3 years ago and where we're going to be within a month. And these are all folks who've come up through the ranks and that are now taking on the leadership of the police bureau. You'll also see a new deputy chief in EMS, a new deputy chief in fire, and a new deputy chief in public safety. So it's sort of a changing of the guard when it comes to public safety in the city of Pittsburgh. But it's good that all of those folks who we are promoting have worn the patches on their shoulders that say Pittsburgh.
And we're very proud of everyone who serves.
Yep.
We're already into February in 2017, but could you give us a preview of the remainder of the year?
No, well, there's going to be no more snow. So we're done with snow.
Nice.
Yeah. Other than that, there's going to be a big initiative. And this has been called our resiliency plan. We will have a different name for it. But what it is for the first time since the 1940s and early 50s, we're going to present a vision of where this city needs to go for the next 40 years. And we're going to map out what its challenges will be. Shocks and stresses. Stresses, constant things that are there that if not addressed will never allow the city to get to its potential. Shocks, the things that may happen, both man-made and natural, that will set the city back. The city burned to the ground in the 19th century. It was flooded in the early 20th century. It went through economic collapse in the past 30 years, greater unemployment than during the Great Depression. But it's always been able to come back and survive. What we're going to do is try to forecast where and how those different factors will be, and what can we do now in order to prepare for it. Now, an initiative like that costs a lot of money, and we're not going to be able to go to Washington and get a check. We're not going to be able to go to Harrisburg and get a check. So what we're going to do is we're going to do two things that Pittsburghers know how to do. We're going to roll up our sleeves and work hard, and we're going to innovate. And we're going to go and get those partners, just like we had those partners that clean the air and clean the water, just like we had those partners that helped to build the middle class, just like we had those partners that got us through the economic turbulence of the 80s and the 90s. We're going to ask everyone to be a part of it. And we're going to build it from the ground up over the course of the next 10 years to make sure that this city is in a very good place for the next 30 to 40.
Well, that's really important and really exciting. I don't have any other questions. Is there anything else that you'd like to talk about?
I don't think I could have ended it any better than that.
Okay.
Yeah, that's...
All right, Mayor. Well, thank you so much for
thank
being
you.
here. This is Christy Aller-Schmidt for City Channel Pittsburgh. Thanks for watching.